The Avengers vs. the Peter Factor by midnightwolf2192, my personal redo. Chapter 14, Scott and Hope. Before I get started, this will contain images of beating up kids, so just so you're aware, it's not pleasant, but it's brief. Scott and Hope were the next two to meet Peter, and once again, it was because of a missing child. Actually, a few missing children. Scott and Hope were sitting at the tower one afternoon, watching a movie, when his phone started ringing. It was Maggie, Scott's ex. She was asking whether or not Cassie was with him, to which Scott replied that she wasn't. Maggie and Jim having relocated to New York, both for Jim's work, and for Scott to still be able to see Cassie with ease. This caused Maggie to let out a cry, and the phone being passed to Jim.
"Jim, where's my baby girl?"
Scott asked. He could feel Hope coming to stand beside him as he spoke, and he desperately grabbed her hand.
"We don't know, Scott,"
Jim explained.
"We went to school to pick Cassie up, but the teacher on duty said that someone had already been and gotten her. We thought it might have been you, but obviously not. What can I do?"
Scott asked. He noticed Hope already had her phone out and was texting someone furiously.
"I don't know,"
Jim said helplessly. Fear shot through Scott as the elevator doors opened and some of the Avengers emerged. Tony, Clint, Cap and Sam poured out of the elevator, and Scott noticed the scared, heartbroken looks on Clint and Tony's faces, and he tensed.
"Is Cassie missing too?"
Clint asked.
"Hang on, Jim,"
Scott said down the phone before putting his hand over the receiver.
"How do you know? What do you know?" "Lila, Cooper and Peter are missing,"
Cap said. Hope approached Tony, and Scott watched as his girlfriend looked at her old friend in the eye. Something had her gasping, and she pulled the man into a hug.
"Jim, we may have a lead. Give me 10 minutes,
Scott said. When Jim confirmed, he hung up the phone.
"Where the hell is my daughter?"
Scott, Hope and the others climbed back into the elevator and travelled up to one of the conference rooms. All of the Avengers were currently sitting inside the room, watching security footage from traffic cameras.
"Check the cameras around Cassie Lang's school,"
Tony ordered. Nat began typing diligently, and soon the cameras around Cassie's school appeared on the screen. "Clint, what's happening?"
Hope asked. "We got a message this afternoon, saying that we need to pay for our actions," Clint explained angrily. "The message said we would pay through our children. Then Laura called and said Coop and Lila had never gotten off the bus. Peter wasn't around for Happy to pick up, and his friend said someone else had come and collected him." "Who is Peter?" Scott demanded as the Avengers scoured the footage. "Tony's kid,"
Clint said softly, and Scott gasped.
"I know. He's actually Tony's intern, but their relationship is so much more than that."
"Got them!" Nat's voice interrupted whatever Scott would have said next. She enlarged one of the screens, the one from outside Cassie's school, and the team watched as a man in black approached Cassie. He spoke to her quickly, and she looked ready to run. The man quickly covered her mouth with a rag, and soon the girl fell limp. The man lifted the now unconscious girl and carried her back to the waiting van. The very image of a man carrying his sleeping child.
"What else can you find?"
Cap said, and Nat pressed a few buttons. The camera zoomed in, and the team gasped. Peter was lying in the back of the van Cassie was placed in. His hands and feet were bound, and he appeared to be unconscious. Tony let out a savage slew of swears that had Rhodey and Pepper rushing to his side.
"Any idea who these assholes are?"
Bucky asked, his metal hand clenching as he gripped the table. "Unclear as of yet," Nat replied. She continued typing on the computers and tracking the van as it moved away from Cassie's school. She lost the van in a tunnel heading out of Manhattan.
"We'll find her,"
Clint reassured Scott, probably trying to reassure himself just as much. The team scoured security cameras for hours until Friday announced an incoming message. Tony ordered her to put it on the screen, and the Avengers all gasped at what they saw. Cooper, Lila, Cassie and Peter were all tied up to chairs in the center of a dark room. The four kids were in various stages of consciousness, with Peter being the most aware, and Cassie still unconscious. So glad you could join us, a man said as he appeared in the frame. The man obviously thought either the Avengers would never find him, or if they did he would die anyway, as his face was completely uncovered. Nat immediately began running facial recognition on him.
Why have you taken the kids?
Steve ordered, and the man let out an evil chuckle. As I said in my message, you need to pay for what you have done, the man hissed out. You have caused untold destruction. Everywhere you go, you leave a trail of wreckage behind.
We are sorry if that is what's happened to you,
Bruce chimed in, and the man let out a hollow cackle. Sorry? Yes, because that fixes everything, the man said. He stepped out of frame, and the team watched as Peter's eyes widened slightly. But I know something that will make me feel a little better.
And what's that?
Tony challenged. Knowing that you are feeling the pain I do, the man said. He returned to frame with a pair of brass knuckles visible on his hand. The team let out anguished cries as he approached the children. All of us here had to watch our children die because of you so-called heroes. You can now feel our pain. Lila was now more alert, and had started to cry when she noticed their predicament. The man moved closer to her, but stopped as another voice piped up. Leave her alone! Peter's voice, while dripping in fear, was firm as he spoke. The camera panned to him, and the Avengers noticed he was staring at the man with a steely gaze. What did you say? The man said, and Peter gritted his teeth. Leave the others alone! If you want to hurt anyone, you hurt me, not them, Peter demanded, to the horror of all watching. You take them back to the cell, unharmed. Do that, and you can do whatever you want to me. How brave, the man said sarcastically. The man looked off camera and nodded. The camera panned back to the kids, and the team watched as the 3 kids were untied from their chairs. Lila broke out of her captor's grasp and ran to Peter. No, Peter! Lila could be heard sobbing. The team had tears in their eyes as they heard Peter's response. I'll be all right, Lila. Peter was trying to provide comfort, but the team could hear how scared he was. Go with Coop and Cassie. I'll be okay. The Avengers could hear the screams of protest from Cooper and Lila as the 3 remaining kids were dragged from the room. Peter looked up at their main captor and steeled his gaze. The man smirked down at him before turning back to the camera. Imagine our surprise when we realized that not only did Ant-Man and Hawkeye have kids, but so did Iron Man. The infamous playboy Tony Stark with a child, the man taunted as he moved to stand behind Peter. He rested his hands firmly on the boy's shoulders, and the Avengers watched as Peter tensed. It made it all the more fun when we found him. Now, we can not only get revenge on the Avengers, but also on the so-called Merchant of Death. Quite the moniker, Stark. Don't call him that, Peter said, and the man frowned. He looked down at the teen and grabbed him by the chin. What did you say? The man hissed. Don't call him the Merchant of Death, Peter replied defiantly. The man moved to stand in front of the teen, and with a sharp intake of breath, he raised his hand and backhanded Peter across the face. Peter didn't make a sound, but he did take a few deep breaths once the blow had landed. He is a better man than you'll ever be! Once Peter had righted himself in the chair, the man pulled back his fist. Tony let out a cry as the fist with the brass knuckles collided with the teen's face. Zip it, brat! The man hissed. Peter shook his head slightly, before spitting a mouthful of blood at the guy. The man looked unamused as the blood splattered onto his shoe. Charming. Simply charming. The team could only watch in horror
as the man started laying into Peter with his fists. Bucky was swearing in Russian and throwing furniture. Nat was typing furiously on the computer, while also ranting in Russian. Pepper had tears streaming down her face, while Tony stared blankly at the floor. Bruce and Rhodey were attempting to comfort Tony and Pepper, while Steve attempted to calm Bucky, but it was to no avail. "Nat, please, tell me you've got something," Clint asked, feeling helpless as he watched the kid on the screen get pommeled. To Scott's surprise, the teen was still conscious. Normally, blows to the face like the ones he had received would knock a person out, but not this kid. "She won't find us." The man beating Peter stopped to stare at the camera. He was sweaty, and a look at his hands showed they were covered in Peter's blood. He nodded to someone off camera, and the barely conscious teen was lifted from his seat and dragged out of the camera shot. "We just wanted to give you one final chance to see your kids. You will never see them alive again. Enjoy your pain, Avengers. We certainly will." The camera feed cut out, and only then did Tony let out a scream of anguish. Scott, not caring for the projectiles Tony was throwing, walked over to the other man and grabbed his shoulders. "This won't help our kids," Scott hissed firmly, as Tony tried to struggle against him. "We will find them. All of them. And when we do, you and I are gonna kill whoever did this. No one messes with our kids." Tony nodded, and Scott surprisingly pulled the other man into a hug. Clint joined them, and the Avengers watched as the three dads sought comfort from one another. It took 2 days. 2 days of diligent searching by Stark's AI and all the Avengers. They traced all possible leads and kept coming up blank. On the 3rd day, a Saturday, Scott walked into the common room to find Tony sitting beside a sobbing brunette and 2 teenagers. "Scott, this is May, Peter's aunt, and his friends Ned and MJ,"
Tony introduced softly. The woman attempted to compose herself as she looked up at Scott, but the hero knew she was struggling. He sat down beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders.
"Our kids will be fine,"
Scott said, his tone setting May off again.
"Peter is strong. He will be all right." "Tony was just about to show me the footage,"
May said hoarsely. She then turned to the 2 teenagers.
"I've been trying to convince this pair to leave, but they are stubborn."
"We're Peter's friends. We have to be stubborn." The girl, MJ, replied, and May let out a watery laugh. Ned nodded in agreement as he looked over at Scott.
"If you're ready,"
Tony said. When all 3 nodded, Tony ordered Friday to project the image onto the wall. Scott tightened his grip on the woman as Cassie appeared on the screen, and May rested her hand on his. "Wait!" Ned cried just as the man struck Peter for the first time. Tony paused the footage, and Scott was expecting to see tears on the kid's face. Instead, he had a focused look of determination. "Friday, rewind the footage. 30 seconds.
"What can you see, Ned?"
MJ asked as she moved from her perch on the arm of the chair to sit beside the other kid. "Friday, play it again, but slow it down," Ned ordered. As Friday did as requested, the boy stood and approached the wall. "Pause. Zoom in on his right hand. Now rewind and play again." "Ned?" May asked, and Ned let out a triumphant yell. "New Jersey!" he cried, to the shock of everyone. He then pointed to where Peter's hand was making tiny movements. "They are in New Jersey!"
"How can you tell?"
Scott and Tony asked at the same time. "He's using the code we developed," Ned explained. "We made it when we were in middle school. One of our teachers separated us because apparently we talked too much. We devised a form of sign language to still be able to communicate across the room. It had to be less obvious than normal sign, so we could hide it. We use it now if Peter is having a sensory overload and talking hurts."
So he's telling us they're in New Jersey?
MJ asked. Tony pulled out his phone and called for the Avengers. May was now clutching Scott's hand in anticipation. Yep, Ned said, turning back to the wall. Friday rewound the footage, and Ned pointed to Peter's hand. New Jersey, warehouses, fish, 17 guys.
A warehouse by the water,
MJ commented, and Ned nodded. The Avengers emerged from the elevator and turned to the group. The girl turned to them, and Scott had to admire the look on her face. It was a mix between anger and fierce determination.
They are being held in New Jersey, in a warehouse by the water. There's 17 of them. Got it. Avengers, suit up. We leave in 5.
Cap ordered. The team nodded and dispersed. May squeezed Scott's hand and he smiled comfortingly at the woman. Go get our kids, she said, and Scott nodded. He walked down to his room where his suit was kept and got changed. 5 minutes later, the Avengers were all assembled by the Quinjet. May and the 2 teens were standing with Laura, Maggie, Jim, and Pepper. Go get our baby girl, Maggie whispered as she hugged Scott. Scott nodded at his ex and joined the team on the jet. Now that Ned was able to narrow down our search, we think we found them, Nat commented as the team got settled. Clint was piloting the jet as they flew towards New Jersey. We've found a supposedly abandoned warehouse that has been showing significant energy readings for the last week and a half. We tracked the security and traffic cameras and found the van that was used to take Peter and Cassie. We followed it to that same warehouse. We have also footage from a neighbouring warehouse that shows Lila and Cooper being carried in as well, Sam added. The team nodded and started to prepare themselves for the fight they knew was coming. 15 minutes later, they landed at Fort Dix Army Base. The Avengers climbed out of the jet and climbed into the cars that Tony had requested. Soon enough, they were converging on the abandoned warehouse identified by Natasha.
Scott, you, Sam, and Clint will find the kids,
Cap ordered as the team gathered outside the warehouse.
Tony, you, Rhodey, Vision, and Hope will take the top floors and work your way down. Nat, Bucky, Wanda, and I will enter through the front here. Bruce, you hang here. Peter will need medical. Alright, let's get the kids back.
The flyers took off from the ground and headed for the top floor, while Bucky took point at the door. On Steve's count, Bucky kicked open the door and stormed in. Sam, Clint, and Scott broke away from the group as soon as they had entered and began clearing rooms looking for the kids. Scott could hear yelling and bullets flying as he searched, but he knew the Avengers would be fine. His main priority was the kids. Nothing here, Sam commented as they cleared the last room. Scott refused to believe that the kids had been moved. He looked out of the window and took off running. Scott! Cellar! Outside! Scott called as they ran. They came upon a padlocked cellar, and Scott instantly shrunk himself. He climbed into the lock, and after some fiddling, the lock opened. When he was large again, Clint and Sam counted down before pulling the doors open. No one emerged, so Sam took point as they climbed into the cellar. Shit, Sam muttered, and Scott could only agree. Peter was crouching in front of a cowering Cooper, Lila, and Cassie. He was covered in blood and bruises, and from the way he was holding himself, he probably had a number of cracked or broken ribs. He attempted to straighten up once he realized who had entered, but he could only gasp. The 3 adults raced over as the injured teen dropped to the ground and passed out. Cassie! Scott cried. His daughter let out a sob and launched herself into his arms. He pressed kisses onto her head as she cried into his shoulder. One look showed him that Clint was doing the same with his kids, while Sam was placing Peter in the recovery position. Daddy! Cassie sobbed, and Scott attempted to soothe her. Peter saved us.
I know, baby. I know,
Scott whispered. He raised his hand to his comms and placed the call.
Guys, we've got the kids, but Peter needs medical. He's unconscious. Location.
Cap barked out firmly.
Cellar outside. Cap, we need a stretcher.
Sam commented. The sound of repulsors was soon heard, and Tony came racing down the cellar. He dropped to his knees beside the kid and ran a hand over his hair.
I'm here, Pete. It's all okay now.
Scott could hear Tony speaking softly to the kid as he ran his hand over Peter's head. The other Avengers entered the cellar. Natasha and Bruce bringing up the rear with medical kits and a stretcher. Bruce raced to the teen while Natasha approached the Barton kids. Hope walked over to Scott and Cassie, and Scott pulled her into the hug.
Baby, how many times did they hit Peter?
Scott asked his daughter, who was looking over at the unconscious teen in fear. They took him out of here a couple of times a day, Cassie explained. They wanted to take one of us, but Peter never let them. He'll be okay, won't he, Daddy?
Of course he will, baby,
Scott whispered, kissing his daughter on the head again. Bruce was looking over Peter's wounds, his face grim.
Okay, let's get him on the stretcher. Bucky, Steve, Sam, Tony, you'll need to carry Peter out of here,
Bruce said. He then turned to Wanda.
Wanda, will you be able to keep him asleep? The last thing we want is for him to wake up during transport.
After a confirming nod from Tony, Wanda waved her hand over Peter's head. Red tendrils flowed from her hands and into Peter's mind. Once the boy was secured on the stretcher, the Avengers stood and climbed out of the cellar. The group moved quickly to the cars and drove away from the warehouse. Once they had boarded the Quinjet, Bruce alerted Dr. Cho to their location, and Vision flew the jet back to New York. Once the jet arrived, Cho and her team quickly took Peter off to the medbay, Tony following close behind. Scott hadn't relinquished his hold on Cassie, and instead he and Clint walked their kids back to the Avengers' common room. Laura and Maggie jumped to their feet as they entered the rooms, and the kids were instantly wrapped in their mother's arms. Clint and Scott tried to deposit the kids with their mothers so they could check on Peter, but the kids were having none of it. "No, Dad!" Cooper demanded as Clint tried to leave. "You take us with you to Peter, or I swear the tantrum I throw will make one of Nate's look like a tea party!" "He gets it from you," Laura teased, and Clint rolled his eyes. The large group made their way to the medbay, where May, Ned, MJ and the Avengers were all waiting.
"Any word?"
Clint asked the group, who all shook their heads. "Cho took him straight into surgery. His healing doesn't seem to be working," Bruce explained as the new arrivals sat down. "He hasn't eaten," Lila commented softly from her spot curled into Clint's side. The Avengers all turned to the girl, dread growing in them. "They only fed us once a day. Peter refused to eat any of the food. He made us take it." "He has super metabolism," Ned said in horror. The group now turning to him, Bruce stood quickly and raced into the room where Cho was working on Peter. "It's why MJ and I bring an extra lunch each for him. Peter and I once sat down to work out all his powers, and he told me he has super metabolism. I've seen him demolish 5 large pieces to himself and still have room for dessert." "My baby has been starving himself," May whispered, and Scott leant over to take her hand. Ned and MJ both looked at the woman, and MJ smiled sadly.
"He didn't want you to worry,"
MJ said softly. May looked at the girl with a frown.
"Peter mentioned that he felt really bad already for making you pay for things. He wasn't going to add an increased grocery bill to that list. We told him that he was being stupid, but he's stubborn."
"When he gets out of surgery, we are going to have a long discussion," May said firmly, and Scott was actually scared for the teen.
"Count me in,"
Tony spoke for the first time, and May nodded.
"No more hiding. He will tell me the extent of his powers, or I'm taking his suit again."
"Okay, back up," Scott said. Tony looked at him and nodded.
"Powers? Suit? I'm confused. Peter is Spider-Man. It's how I first met him,"
Tony explained, and Clint choked slightly. Tony turned to the archer and continued,
"Don't yell. Don't start. I know I was an idiot for taking him with me to Germany. But I was desperate. May and Pepper have already ripped me a new one because of it."
"I did. I grounded Pete from Tony for 2 weeks, which nearly killed both of them," May said, almost fondly. "We now have a strict set of rules regarding his Spider-Man adventures. Rules that both Tony and Peter follow." The Avengers fell silent after that admission, as they waited for news from Helen. During their waiting, Happy arrived carrying multiple bags of McDonald's food. The 5 kids were handed the bags, and the Barton kids and Cassie dove in eagerly. 4 hours passed before Dr. Cho emerged from the operating room. The group all jumped up and Cho held up a hand to stop their onslaught of questions. He will be all right. The group breathed a sigh of relief at her words. He had some significant internal bleeding, 9 broken ribs, 4 cracked ribs, a fractured cheekbone, a fractured scapula, and a broken nose.
Shit,
Rhodey hissed, and the others nodded. Once Bruce advised us of his healing factor and his need for food, we hooked him up to various IVs full of nutrients. Once we started him on those, the breaks and fractures started healing by themselves. Helen explained. He will need to stay in bed for a few more days, but I predict that he will be completely healed by Wednesday.
Thanks, Helen,
Tony said softly. He's in his own room now. You can see him, but only a few at a time, Helen explained. Tony, May, Ned, MJ and Pepper were the first small group to enter. When Scott, Cassie and Hope were allowed in, Tony was the only one still in the room. The other man had sent May and the teens to bed, while telling them that he would watch over their spider team. Peter was awake, but Scott could see that he was still groggy. Hi, Petey, Cassie said as Scott lifted her. She sat near the boy's hand on the bed and took it in hers. The teen smiled at the girl despite the pain, and squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for saving me.
Anytime, Cass, anytime.
Peter's voice was hoarse, and Tony rolled his eyes.
Shut it off, man. Make me spider brat,
Tony said fondly.
Peter, I can never thank you enough for protecting my baby,
Scott said, and Peter turned his attention to the man.
I wish you hadn't been hurt, but thank you. I wasn't going to let them hurt any of the kids,
Peter said as Cassie squeezed his hand again.
So there's no need to thank me.
You are very brave, Hope commented, and Peter blushed slightly. Stupid, but brave. I wonder where you got that from.
All right, Van Dyne, zip it,
Tony said, and Hope just laughed.
We'll let you rest,
Scott said, and Cassie frowned, before leaning up to give Peter a kiss on the cheek. After helping his daughter get off the bed, Scott grabbed Peter's hand.
Get better soon, Bug Bro.
See ya, Bug Bro, Peter said with a huge Cheshire grin on his face. Hope, Scott and Cassie left the room, and once outside, Scott lifted Cassie into his arms. Sorry, Daddy, Cassie said as she burrowed into his neck. Spider-Man is my favourite superhero now.
That's all right, bub,
Scott said as Hope took his hand in hers.
He's mine too.
And mine, Hope added as they walked. Inside Peter's room, Tony smirked as he added another 2 Avengers to the victim count. Peter factor 16, Avengers and Co. 0. End of chapter. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Oof, okay, that one's hard, and I hate what those men did to Peter, but I like the Avengers' reaction to it. That's sort of my go-to when it comes to horrible things happening to characters I like. I hate that they happen, but I love how those they love react. I've gone through that myself. So basically, I was bullied a fair bit. Not going to go into details, but I always loved when people stood up for me, be it my parents or the teachers or my friends. It's just heartwarming to know you've got people in your corner, you know? And I think that's a healthy way to look at situations like this. No matter how many horrible people there are, I believe there are always more good people. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.